Hello. So in this video, I'd like to share my experience of how it feels to be, if not unique, certainly feeling very strange and outside the pack, as it were, in terms of my sexuality. Now, I may not be totally unique, but I've never come across anyone who's expressed an identical pattern of the sort of mix of variables that come into our sexuality and gender identity and do feel outside the norm in terms of the experiences shared by many others in the trans community. In the past, I have actually felt very ashamed. I felt that I'm kind of an aberration of nature. My religious faith has played especially into that. And in the past, certainly, I felt that who I am, how my sexuality wants to be expressed, has felt deeply perverse, even if it's not, thankfully, something that I think has taken me on the wrong side of the law or is in that very immoral area where it's harming potentially other people. So, being disturbed by this condition was really very much my experience in the past, and trying to rectify it or come to terms with it literally took years. In a sense, I saw it as a kind of illness, that I was degenerate in some way, or even that there was some mistake in my biology. Happily, I no longer feel that way. And indeed, quite the opposite. I regret those feelings, and particularly the sense that I have some sort of abnormality of birth, feeling remorse towards both my own mother and indeed towards the divine as someone having faith. But it can be very frustrating and disappointing not to be able to find resources that appear to speak directly to you, even if there's quite a lot of overlap in terms of my sexuality. And I can certainly find a lot on trans forums, that, for example, that is very helpful, but not finding descriptions of people and being able to connect with people in online forums or whatever who do seem to be within my little pack, as it were, does feel very isolating and very frustrating, and leaves me thinking, well, am I crazy? There's always going to be that open question. Is there something wrong in the way that I am programmed, as it were? As someone who has an autistic spectrum disorder and spent many years trying to work out why I was different in terms of my social interactions, it was actually really, more than anything, a huge relief when I discovered this thing called Asperger's syndrome. I went through the process of diagnosis and really could relate to something, and something that could help explain why I was, why I am as I am, I should say, and to know that there are many, many others having the same condition. That's not been the case for me in my experience of my sexuality. So it is good to be able, I think, to hear others' stories and share in discussion with them. And that's really why I've set up this playlist and have offered my own candid testimony around my own sexuality. If there's one person in the world who comes across this and can get some solace from knowing that they're not the only person in the world who feels they're totally unique and strange, then that has been worthwhile. So when you feel that you have an unusual sexuality, it's something not only that you keep quiet about, but perhaps you actively seek to suppress and hide. And that has led to some very uncomfortable social situations, I think, particularly in the workplace for me, particularly in my earlier years, when I think there was probably a less tolerant culture in many UK companies back in the, let's say, 1980s, late 1980s, early 1990s, than there may be now. Although, of course, this is something that may be changing again. I'm not really in touch with that world now. And happily, I'm not going through those sort of formative years when I was questioning, trying to understand what was a confusing sexuality for me, and at the same time trying to keep it secret from everybody else, and, as it were, play acting a role of, let's call it, normality, as many people would see it. So a lot of stress that that does give rise to. And if you do go public on this sort of thing, especially like me, if it's on social media, on a YouTube channel, you're almost guaranteed to get a lot of very unhelpful, impolite, usually very ignorant comments in response. That kind of goes with the territory, really. So I just tend to let those go these days, pass over my head. I don't even read a lot of those comments in any detail. Not really worth the energy trying to get into debate with them. But I am very much now at a point where I feel I want to say to my own community, the trans community, that there are many people know this, certainly within the forums that I take part in, but there will be those that don't, that there are many of us who do not conform even to what might be called trans normal, which I've spoken about in other videos. And at the same time, maybe to educate one or two other folks who are really trying to understand this very confusing picture of sexuality and the non-binary natures, as it were. I also now, I think, possibly am coming to a point, I've not quite discovered where this is yet, but I'm really wondering whether it can even be a bit of a gift, that there are even some advantages in being strange, different. As I say, I haven't quite discovered those yet, but I do take some inspiration. I do not see myself in this category, from reading about shaman and two-spirit people that in many indigenous cultures seem to be recognized as having kind of a spiritual role to play, a ministry, special ministry that they were gifted with, for being able to understand perhaps a little of transcending the gender divide, the binary, and possibly with that, in the case of the shaman, transcending the human and other worlds. Now, I'm not one of those, I don't think, but I do wonder if it means there's something that I've yet to discover, which is a gift with this, a kind of ministry, if you like. And as someone, as I say, who has a strong spiritual foundation and is tries to give myself in service to others, that's reassuring, really. So I guess it was probably in my earlier years, especially during late adolescence and early adulthood, when having a strange sexuality was especially stressful, really very unpleasant, leading to depression and a real dissatisfaction with my life. I have happily come a long way from that. And to some extent, I think that's been helped by being able to be open about my sexuality, less concerned these days, perhaps because I'm in a more privileged position, not being starting in a workplace, for example, and not having relationships that might be threatened were I to open up about this. But actually being able to be open has relieved a lot of that stress. And as I say, I've sort of almost turned 180 degrees from where I was back in those years. So if you're watching this and you're feeling very desperate at the moment, always I'm here to reach out to if you want to. But I guess a part of my testimony is to say that it may well be that there is something really beautiful ahead that you're not seeing. And it's certainly no shame to be different.